Okay, next case, number 2504 51st Street, CE 121-00300.
Case ending in 300-504 51st Street, date order 12/18 of 13, fine started 1/2 of 14, ran for 2,618 days, total is $523,600. Daily fine was $200 a day, date of compliance 3/4 of 21. This is the same owner. Case history is 5 cases on the property under their ownership, currently on sale for $420,000. The original case is fence without a permit. Mitigating circumstances given is that it's the city's fault. I understand he's going to present a lot of information as to how it's the city's fault with the permitting. We have Robert Brown here from the building division to explain which parts seem inaccurate on our end. Normally, this is a 30% ask. The city is asking for 5% based on the size of the lane. Oh, no sheet. I think so.
So if my math is good, the city's asking for 26, is that it?
Say that again, sir?
The city's asking for 5%, which is about 26,000 roughly?
Yes, sir.
Sir, can you tell me your name, what you're asking me for, and why I should grant it to you?
Yes, Roman Courier, owner of 504 51st Street. I'm asking that the board, the magistrate, lift the lien in completion, and I can provide you with some documentation and explain to you why, if I may. Everything I have here has already been submitted to the city, which I suspect is why they have some thoughts on my evidence. May I approach?
Are these documents ones that you've already seen?
What's in the application?
Yeah.
Mr. Courier, were you sworn in?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I was sworn in. If I may, I purchased this home in 2003. I had done extensive renovations to the home, and as you can see as Exhibit A, these are all the permits that I had pulled to do this extensive renovation. It was additions, it was remodeling work, it was electrical work. I had permits pulled to do the driveway. I had permits pulled to do the irrigation work. In 2012, there was a storm that caused some damage to the east side of the fence on the property, and I went and pulled a permit to have the fence fixed. And in doing so, I went down to the city, I filled out the application, and mind you, I'm a first-time homeowner here, so this is the first time I physically was doing this work myself, but I filled out the application, I submitted it to the lady at the desk. She told me she needed a survey. I went and picked up a survey, and I highlighted it, and if you look at Exhibit B, it shows that this is the permit that was submitted, and attached to the permit was the survey that I had submitted as well. And in the survey, she asked me to highlight where the work was being done, and the highlight you see on the survey here is the highlight that was included in the application. The lady then asked for the specs for the materials that I was going to use to repair the fence. So I had to go down to Home Depot, pick up the specs for the hurricane specs for the vinyl shutters that were being, or vinyl fencing that was being put up in place of the wood fencing. She then submitted the application to the historic board. Historic board said we can't approve the vinyl fencing. I explained to them that 3 other homes just on my side of this block also have the vinyl fencing. They said we can't approve it. So I went to the city commission, asked them for approval. Exhibit C is my application to the city. I didn't include all the exhibits because they were unnecessary. The city granted my request to use the vinyl fencing. You can see that as part of Exhibit D, where it shows that approved upon appeal per the city commission. Also, if you go back to the application, you'll see on the survey, it was written directly into the survey that I'm allowed to replace the materials with vinyl siding, with vinyl material. They also note on here that I have to make sure it doesn't go above 6 feet, and it can't be, the gates can't be more than, can't be closer to the street than 25 feet away. So they have to be at least 25 feet away. No question that all of that was complied with. The elderly lady who owned the home immediately east of me sold the house in mid-2013, at which point in time she had pulled a survey as part of her purchase of it, notified the city that the fence was encroaching on her property. And as it turns out, it appears there are no permits prior to this for any fencing in this area. So every home has fencing around it, and I checked and nobody had pulled permits for any of the fencing, so it was unclear, and this is all after the fact, but it was unclear who put the initial fence up. But it appears the fence was initially put up by the homeowners for the 551st Street decades ago. So at the same time all this is going on, I'm out of town because I have some personal crises going on in California. I come back, and the city, in the meantime, the city has notified the new owner, go ahead and pull a permit for the fence on your property, and we'll comply the violation that's reflected on the 504 51st Street. And if you look at Exhibit E, you can see where it shows that was the comment to the homeowner. They say, once you get a permit issued for the fence, the violation issued for 504 51st Street can be, quote, complied. She doesn't pull the permit. She can't pull the permit because she's going to have to do what I did, which is apply for the permit, go to Historic Board, get denied by the Historic Board, go to the City Commission, try to get approval from the City Commission. So she says she can't get the permit. On October 29th, they issue a notice of violation, which is Exhibit F in your materials. And in the notice of violation, what they state is installation of a vinyl fence without a permit and installed on the wrong side of the property line. Notice they don't have any complaints about the gates at this point in time, which is going to become important for your honor. I'm out of town when this comes in. I ultimately make it to a hearing before a magistrate sometime in December. And at that hearing, the magistrate states, and this is Exhibit G. The ruling from the magistrate is it is the order of the special magistrate that the owner shall either apply for the correct permit or take down fence by January 1, 2014, or the city will impose a fine. On December 21st, before I had to fly out of town again, I had two gentlemen come over, take down the entire fence, stack it up neatly in the carport, and it was done. So I had complied with the magistrate's order on December 21st of 2013. In late January, they issue a non-compliance. I think I received it the first week of February. And I called them up and said, look, I got this notice about non-compliance, but I did comply. I complied back in December. They're like, well, in order for you to comply, you have to have a call for an inspection and have them come out. I was like, well, have them come out. It's the fence. They can just drive by and see that there's no fence there. They said, before we can do that, you have to pull another permit and then schedule a specific inspection. So in Exhibit H, you'll see, is the other permit that I pull. So I had to go back down to the city, fill out another permit application, obtain another permit, and this permit you can see says, final inspection only for fence on east side of property for expired permit 121, which is the original permit. I have them come down, they do the inspection on the 12th, confirm that the fence is torn down. They make a note that the gates are still there, but if you see, there's no comment about gates being part of the violation, neither from the city's notice of violation or from the special magistrate. So 7 years, I never hear another thing about it, just like the last gentleman. 7 years later, I'm trying to sell the home, and just before closing, we get to notice that there's a lien for the property. I said, no, that has to be a mistake. And we went through the whole hoops, and they're like, no, it's not a mistake. So we sent all the paperwork to the inspector, Mr. Conrad, who reviewed it and looked at it, and this is Exhibit I. So Exhibit I, Mr. Conrad reviews the materials, recognizes that we were permitted to use vinyl material for the gates as well as the side fence. And he says, upon further review, the approval of the final inspection, the fence permit is now closed. I apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you. We then reach out to the city and say, look, I'm going to lose this buyer. Can you get this lien lifted so we can go forward with the closing? The city's response was, no, you didn't comply because you didn't take down the gates. And I said, well, there's nothing in here that requires me to take down the gates. Their response is, well, you never pulled a permit to install the gates. I said, well, the permit's right here. You can see the permit. The city's response is, no. That permit application says repair fence. It doesn't say install new fence. So I explained to him, I said, no, there's only one form. There's not an install permit form and then a separate repair form. There's nothing to explain the difference. There's just this, and there's no doubt that the fence had gotten knocked down. There's no dispute that I was fixing the fence. The question that they have is that when you replaced the wood material with the vinyl material, that qualifies as an install and not a repair. Therefore, because you said install or repair instead of install, this isn't a valid permit. But my problem with that is they reviewed this application. They saw the survey. They knew exactly what I was doing. They knew I was removing the wood to put the vinyl up, and they said, first you have to provide me with a survey to show me where the vinyl's going. Then they said you have to go get the specs from Home Depot to show me that the new material you're using is meeting the hurricane requirements. Then they sent me to historic department because this material, they said this material isn't approved by us. You have to get approval from historic. Historic said, no, you can't use this material as part of the repair of this fence. And I went to the city commission. The city commission says, yes, you can use this material for part of this permit. They note on the permit, the very permit on the survey where it says approved per city commission. So this permit specifically says that I can use vinyl material to install this fence. So when I removed the fence along the eastern side and left the two gates because it wasn't part of the notice from the city and the gates weren't part of the order from the magistrate, the city's position is that I still wasn't in compliance because the gates weren't in compliance because I should have had a permit that said install, not a permit that said repair. And as a result of that, here I am, 7 years later. I lost the sale on the house. I've been carrying the house. And my position is I complied with the magistrate's order, which is everything that we're dealing with today, on December 21st. This violation should have never been issued, and I am asking you today to lift the lien in whole.
It's a building division case. Our chief building official will respond.
Hello, Robert Brown, building official. So I got involved with this case when Mr. Roman sent his correspondence into the city, so I'm not the inspector who was out there. But the initial permit application was for repairing a fence on the east side of the property. We found that that fence was actually on the neighbor's property, and the neighbor was complaining about it being on her property. I'm not sure whether she did attempt to get a permit for that fence. Mr. Roman is saying that she couldn't get a permit. I have no facts to determine that at all. What I do know is that she obtained a permit for a chain link fence, and she obtained it within 1 day. So she was able to obtain a fence permit for the fence she wanted to install, and she got it in 1 day. She put her fence on her property. Mr. Roman's fence was on her property. He has no right to have a fence on her property. His permit description for repairing a fence is exactly that, repairing a fence. Not installing a fence, not fence and gates. We have only to go by the documents that he submits, and when he changes what he wants to do, he needs to inform the city that he's changing the scope of his permit. So he didn't end up repairing the fence, he ended up putting up a fence and also installing gates. I have no objection to the lien reduction because at this point the fence has been removed, so the violation has been resolved. So I have no objection to that. To my mind, it has served its purpose, the lien, but Mr. Courier is objecting to, I guess, the amount of the lien. So I think that's what we're here to discuss, is what would the lien reduction result in.
I guess, so here's my confusion. So the reason this this fine ran for so long was because of the gates?
Well, the gates are unpermitted, so we didn't have documentation to show that the gates were part of the permit application. The description on the second permit said that it was a permit, final inspection only for fence on the east side of the property for expired permit, and gives the original permit number. So all that inspection can do is we can perform an inspection for the scope of work stated on the original permit, which was not for gates, and also didn't authorize anything to be on the neighbor's property. So the
So I guess
fence on the
when
neighbor's
so-
property is something that she's objecting to, so we have to make sure that her objection is heard.
So he's telling me that he removed the vinyl fence from her property in I guess, December of that year, right? But the city found that it was still a violation. The reason it was still a violation was because the gates were not removed?
Yeah, it's unpermitted work, yes.
Were the gates not part of the original permit that allowed him to do that? I mean, presumably, right, if that fence had not been on his neighbor's property, would the gates have been properly part of that permit?
Well, not when the description says repairing fence. So if you're describing installing gates, then you'll say on the permit application that you're
So
installing
no matter
gates.
where that fence was being built, those gates were always going to be a problem,
Unless there was a permit for
unless there was a
installing
permit
gates.
particularly for the gates.
Correct, yes. Well,
Just to
it could have been
provide
included with the
clarification.
fence permit. So you can have a fence permit to include installing gates, but the fence
But you're
permit-
saying this permit did not?
this permit is for repairing a fence.
If I may,
Yeah.
I'll take you to Exhibit B. If you look at the description, it specifically says, quote, repairing fence on east side of property and gates. It's highlighted on the survey. It was clear what was being done, and there was no dispute of it at this point in time.
So you're repairing a fence and repairing gates.
If there was a violation, if they thought the gates were a violation, that should have been part of the October 2013 notice that was sent to me, and it should have been addressed by the magistrate at the December hearing we went to. But there was no discussion of the gates, and I don't think the city's revisionist history is really fair, because if you look at Exhibit E, this was from Mr. Brown himself. He says, so long as you homeowner over there on 551st Street, as long as you pull a permit for that fence, then 504 will be complied. So he understood back in October the gates weren't an issue. For him, it was only concerned about the fence on her property. But here we are 7 years later, and now the gates are suddenly, for the first time ever, an issue with the permit. But it specifically says, expressly says, gates when I applied for that permit, and that was approved by the city.
It expressly says repairing, not installing.
There's no dispute that there were gates there when I bought the house, and that I had replaced the gates. Now, the posts all remain, because there's all these posts that hold up the fencing and the gates. Those all remains. I just changed the material where the gates were. I went from the wood ones that weren't durable and weren't holding up to the vinyl, and I went through every hoop imaginable to get the approval to do that. The whole debate here, the reason I lost the sale of this home is because this generalized application says for a fence permit, doesn't say whether it's a repair or install, and the city's interpreting my work as new installation, so I should have used the word install instead of use the word repair. But they knew when I filed this application that I was installing the vinyl material. So if they didn't agree with me installing the vinyl material and they wanted it worded differently, they had to do that in 2012 when I submitted the application, not 8 years later after they're trying to fine me $523,000 for a fine I never knew was running.
Were there gates where there currently are gates in the fence that you were repairing?
Yes, there were gates. There were always gates
So
there.
what did you actually do? Did you tear out the old gates and put in new gates?
I took off the wood gates, and when you buy the vinyl, they come with these sleeves that go over the wooden posts. So you just slide the sleeves over it and tack the new gate onto the sleeve. But the posts are the same wooden 4x4 posts in the ground.
So in the city's view, is that repairing or installing?
That's installing. The permit description in box 4 says project fence repair. In box 5, further description, repairing fence on east side of property and gates. So it's all about repair. The neighbor has complained that there was encroachment, and I was telling her that she can obtain a permit for anything that's on her property. It doesn't matter to me who put it there. If she wants to get a permit for it, she can get a permit and help her neighbor to get his case complied. I don't know that she ever attempted to do that. What she did was obtain a permit for a chain link fence, which is probably somewhere else on her property. She got that permit in 1 day, which is not atypical for a fence permit, which is legitimately submitted.
Ms. Wofford applied for that after I removed my fence in 2014. That has absolutely nothing to do with today. And the most important thing for today is that the magistrate order only states that I'm required to remove the fence. If the city wanted me to have to remove the gates as well, then they should have said so in the notice of violation and the magistrate could have addressed it. But they didn't, she didn't, and I've never removed the gates because no one's ever noticed me that the gates were some kind of problems, even though, in my opinion, the permit expressly addresses it, and the city approved it, knowing that I was changing the wood material to a vinyl. They approved this permit.
It's not reasonable to assume that the gates are part of the fence?
No, the fence is one item, and like Mr. Brown just said here, he understood that the application only said fence. He didn't realize it also said gate. So when I pointed out here now, he just told you that, well, no, it was just for fence. It didn't include gates. So now that I point out that it includes gates, the whole focus of it is, well, it was the word repair instead of the word install, which is so hyper-technical, especially for a homeowner who's never pulled one before. The city has individuals there who are approving these things. They're going to look for it. If they know I'm asking to replace wood material with vinyl material, and they see the word repair, knowing there's a fence there and I'm changing out the material from wood to vinyl, they're going to say, if that's not acceptable, no, you're not doing a repair, it has to be an install. They knew exactly what I was doing. It's all documented. It couldn't be more clear. The survey shows it.
Let me ask the city official this. So when he repaired the previous fence by taking the wood off and putting the vinyl on, is that not akin to what they did with the gates, taking the wood off and putting the vinyl on? What's the difference? What makes it a repair versus an installation?
So a repair is when you're replacing parts of any structure. So you can repair parts of, you can mend parts of. So taking down, the description says repair of the fence, repair of the gates. Now when the neighbor is complaining to me that this is on her property, I'm going to address that with her. That's how I got involved. The whole process that Mr. Courier is referring to, this is a zoning review process. So it comes through my staff to process it for zoning. If it goes to historic and he has to go to the Historic Preservation Board, that's not something my staff is aware of. We don't deal with that. If it goes to commission to get that approval, again, that's something that is not something that my staff are going to be intimately familiar with. He's intimately familiar with what he's doing with his fence. 1,000 permits a month doesn't give us the opportunity to be intimately familiar with what he's doing with his fence. So the onus is on him to describe the work adequately that we know what's going on. And if it says repair of a fence, we're going to take it to be repair of the materials on that fence. When we go out there and we see a gate in vinyl material that was not part of the original fence, that's a new installation. So he now has unpermitted work. And I brought up the neighbor's fence permit only because Mr. Courier is saying that somehow his neighbor attempted to get a permit for that fence that was encroaching on her property and was unable to do so. I don't have any knowledge of that. What I do have knowledge of was what she was telling me, and that she was able to get a fence permit for her chain link fence. Again, I have no objection to the lien reduction. No, that's not what I'm here to do, is to object to the lien reduction. I'm fine with him getting the lien reduction. So I think what we're talking about is the amount of the lien reduction.
Yeah, I'm just trying to balance the equities, because the argument from the property owner is that this shouldn't be a violation. I just want to get the city's understanding is that this definitely should be a violation.
Yes, he had a permit to repair a fence, and he's replaced parts of the fence and changed the material. He's not repairing it like for like. That's what a repair is, like for like. This is not like for like. That's why he had to go to the Historic Preservation Board, because it wasn't like for like. It's a different material.
On that point, two things. That's inconsistent with Mr. Robert Brown's email from October 2013, where he says, as long as she pulls the permit to cover the fence, the 504 will be complied. That's Exhibit E. And it's also inconsistent with the fact that if you look at the notice of violation, it specifically only references fence. It doesn't say anything about the gates not being properly permitted. And if you look at H, the order from the city, or this is G actually, G's to this order from the magistrate, she's only telling me to take down the fence. She's not telling me that the gates are somehow a violation. So they can't now hold 7 years later that work that was done on the property that's not reflected on the magistrate's order is a permissible violation.
I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, though. As I read the order, essentially she's saying, get the right permit or take what you did down. And you made changes to the gates. I don't find it as an illogical reading of this order to say that somehow you did repair work on the fence and gates, but the only thing you're supposed to take down is the fence. You know, it's separate from the gates. I mean, you treated them the same in the application, essentially, that you're doing this work to replace the gates and fence. I don't know.
I set them out separately, though. I mean, and I think Mr. Brown understood that as well. He just said if I had wanted to replace the gates, I should have applied for a permit that said I was doing that with the gates. So then I pointed out that the permit
I think what he was saying was that if you were going to do the type of, replacement that you did in that permit where you were talking about the fence and the gates, you should have been a little more explicit, I think was his argument, but.
And maybe, maybe I could have. I was a first-time homeowner at the time, doing my first application, and that's why you go to the city and you sit down, and they will tell you, because they are the ones that wanted the survey, they're the ones that wanted the materials verification to make sure that the new materials that I'm using are going to meet the specs for the city. And despite telling them that, look, I'm using this material, they're like, okay, we see it, everything's fine, application approved, here's your permit. If their position was, no, if you're using new material, you can't have a piece of paper that says, repairing fence and gates, you have to reword this and say install. That'd be wholly unfair to ask a homeowner to understand their little technicalities of install versus repair. That would be something they would have done before authorizing the permit to be completed, which specifically says the material is being changed out. And that's what the whole fight was over. Having to go to the historic board and having to go to the city commission was because we were changing the material. They knew we were changing the material out, and if they didn't think that the repair language was acceptable when I was changing out the material, their time to object to it was in October of 2012 when I was applying for this permit. That's when they say, no, the scope of work that you're asking to do doesn't fit with your description, so we're going to deny this, and you can resubmit it with the proper language. But they never did that. They approved it.
Must have been quite a shock to see the size of the fine on this property, huh?
It was not only was it a shock, but I've taken great care of this property. I mean, people thought it was a tear down, and I've completely remodeled it. Everything in that house is new roof, new addition on the back, specialized driveway. I even pulled a permit to replace the envelope from the road to the sidewalk. Every detail of the house was done to the, best I could possibly do it. Specialized doors, impact glass, everything in that house was done high end. And then, have someone try to hit me with a fine for 150% of the value of the home. Yeah, it's shocking.
All right, so this is what I think. I'm neither a building official nor am I the homeowner that pulled these permits, but I'm trying to find the equities here. I think you have some good arguments about the scope and certainly the the difficulty you had here. I don't dismiss the city's claims, though, associated with the gates. I don't think that's unreasonable, their point of view, that the installation of the gates constituted something that you didn't describe in the permits and never correctly addressed. But I don't think it warrants the size of this fine. The city's certainly, I guess the city's largely in agreement, since they offered to reduce the fine to $26,000 from $523,000. I still think that that's high considering the equities of the situation. I'm going to reduce this thing to $5,000 payable within 30 days.
Thank you.
Mr. Courier, here's a copy of your order. Number 3, 4121 Heath Circle South,